John McMullen, who joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John, and I texted you when you asked it. I thought you asked the question of the day up there. That was the question of the day. And I think Howie virtually admitted that Jim Schwartz got Fletcher Cox some big bucks. I mean, he basically acknowledged that Jim has got these guys paid, and he did so for his player, Fletcher Cox here. So kudos for the question, number one, but I think it was a very good indication of, hey, we want to get him now because if he plays in this system next year, he could come to us and say, I want even more money.
Yeah, and Howie admitted once you get to the franchise tag, that's an issue. So obviously you lose a little bit of leverage for getting something done long term. So he kind of talked about the market as a whole, and he said it is what it is. And we mentioned that yesterday, and the fact that, hey, this is the going rate for good players at that particular position, and that's what the Eagles were dealing with. And Howie kind of admitted, hey, it's tough anytime you have to invest that kind of money into anything, but that's how you do business in the NFL. And he obviously knew that this day was going to come. Cox was going to get the big payday, and that's kind of exactly what happened. And he mentioned Jim Schwartz has gotten a lot of defensive tackles paid, and Fletcher is just the latest one.
Yeah, he said it's hard to think his value is going to go down in this system. He said Jim Schwartz has made a lot of money for guys in this league. So they wanted to wrap this up and get it done because one thing is for certain, they were very vocal about wanting to get this done. And that's something Roseman kind of laughed at and said, you know what, we got to learn from that the next time, not being so open and honest with the fact that we want our guy back here.
Yeah, and that's probably a prudent idea because you never want to go and stick all your cards on the table. And Howie was very upfront about the offseason. And he pretty much said everything we do is with the mentality that we eventually have to get Fletcher Cox done. So he knew he kind of was a little bit too upfront, and he said maybe he'll learn from it, and perhaps he should. But anytime you're talking about your best player, the same thing's going on in Denver right now with Von Miller. Everybody knows it. It's not like it's some kind of surprise that these types of negotiations and this type of money is going to be thrown around. So I think Howie was being a little self-deprecating there in the fact that, yeah, he said it, but everybody knew it. So it wasn't like by not saying it, he was going to save the Eagles tens of millions of dollars. Everybody knew exactly what this was going to be, and it ended up with what we expected, between $50 and $60 million, fully guaranteed money.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. He was at the press conference today, asked why the team was 7-9, that he wanted to bring back this core. He was asked if this is all Chip Kelly's doing. Did the team stink because of Kelly? You know what his answer really wanted to be, but he didn't really answer the question in terms of why the team struggled. He just said good teams wrap up their core players. Where did you think he was going with that answer? Because that was really a question of why was this team 7-9, and if they're as good as you are showing us with the money you're giving them, why were they only 7-9?
Well, yeah, and Howie kind of begged off it, and you have to. You can't really. We all know how Chip Kelly and Howie Roseman feel about each other, but he's not going to come out and say, look, Chip was the problem, the complete problem. And I think people forget when we talk about this $280 million in the off season. Yeah, a lot of it is tied up in the players with extensions that were here, Fletcher being the most notable, but also Zach Ertz, Lane Johnson, players like that. But they also spent significant money elsewhere to try to bolster the offensive line with not only a big-name guy like Brandon Brooks, but also a lesser money-wise and Wisniewski. Rodney McLeod, obviously, a highly paid safety. So they went out to fill positions of need in free agency as well. So it's not just the players that are returning from last season's disappointing season. And I think the mentality of the organization is they feel they do have a good core, but it needed some enhancement at certain particular positions, and that's what they've done, and we'll see how it works out. I don't think look at that roster and say it's the same one that's back, because they've significantly added to it.
John, of course, Fletcher Cox also spoke today, and he came off to me sounding very humble. Did you get that sense from him being there today?
Yeah, I mean, Fletcher's always humble. He's not a braggadocio to begin with. So he's been never one. Certain guys obviously carry the swagger. If you look at that defensive line, Brandon Graham's very outspoken, always speaks in a confident fashion, talks about breaking the sack record. That's never been Fletcher's way of going about things. So none of that has changed. He's always been an understated guy. It's tough to be understated when you get $26 million check, but we even asked him, have you bought anything yet? And he said no. So, I mean, that's the kind of guy he is. He's not over the top. He's not going to brag, and he's going to let his play on the field sort of talk for him, and that part of it hasn't changed.
Well, one of the things Mike Gill and I talked about was if he gets this big contract, would he have a target on his back? And I guess he kind of sounded like a leader today, like when things go bad, he realizes that he's a spokesman. Does he now know that he has to be the guy that is going to step up to the microphone every time? Is that a new role for him?
No, I don't think that's the way it's going to play out, to be honest, because I think Fletcher is understated, as I said. So I don't think he's going to be one of those types like Malcolm Jenkins or Jordan Matthews or Zach Ertz or Lane Johnson, the guys who are always talking, always willing to get in front of the microphones, good or bad. I just don't think he's going to turn into that type of player. I think he's more of the realization that he understands he needs to be a leader by his play on the field, because he's the best player on this football team, and he's got to play like it. And the expectations have risen. This is already a guy who you expect to be a Pro Bowl level player. Now it rises to All-Pro. And as I wrote on 973ESPN.com today, Howie went even further than that. Said Fletcher's got a chance to be one of the best players in Eagles history. So that's the bar that has been set for Fletcher Cox, and that's really the target on his back, is the expectations. And people are going to expect a superstar level defensive player.
Now, at one point, John, somebody asked him about never winning or about the playoffs, and he kind of locked back and said, now, wait a second, I'm not worried about that. He sounded like he was very focused. Did you like how his approach was today to answering some of those tough questions?
Yeah, I mean, we getting into that, it's kind of silly. It's silly with quarterbacks, never mind defensive tackles. Obviously, the Eagles haven't won a playoff game in a while, and there's on any given Sunday, there's 53 guys on this team and 46 to dress. So it's tough to say, hey, why Fletcher Cox hasn't made the playoffs? I mean, because he's got a lot of other people that have to carry the water to get them to that particular position. So as far as just putting that on the shoulders of one player, as I said, even a quarterback is unfair, completely unfair. But Howie made it very, very clear today that this is a guy the Eagles have to build upon and build around. And he is one of the core pieces of this organization, core pieces of this defense. Jim Schwartz obviously understands that. But judging by his history, going all the way back to Tennessee with Albert Haynesworth and Ndamukong Suh at Detroit, Marcel Darius in Buffalo, Fletcher Cox is going to play at a high level. It's just a matter of how high.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. He was asked about having $50 million in his pocket by next year, and he said, you just got to continue to be yourself. It sounds like this guy's almost too good to be true in terms of getting the money. You know what I mean? Like, Pete mentioned he's humble. He sounds like a leader, but, it almost, you'll listen to him and you didn't fear that this guy's going to take the money and turn into a fat slob who's just going to be, a non-factor the rest of the way. Like you say, you know what, this guy got paid, and I actually believe that he's going to live up to this money for once. Sometimes you give this money to these guys, and you're like, what the heck were they thinking? I didn't feel that way after hearing him today.
No, I mean, let's be honest. Anybody who gets $50 million is going to change them at some level. As far as professional athletes, though, you hit the nail on the head. You have to find the guys who aren't going to get the big payday and check out and say, okay, I'm done. I've made my money. I don't have to work as hard as what got me to this particular position. And that's kind of what we talked about with the understated nature of Fletcher Cox. That's just not the way he does things. It's just, part of his personality, part of his DNA. He's a hard worker, and I don't think the $26 million he already has, or $50 million he's going to have by next year, I don't think that part of it is going to change the way he looks at it. And the second part is he enjoys playing the game of football. So I think it's very, very enjoyable to him to be at the level he is. And the last thing he wants to do is just be another guy. He wants to be in the conversation with the Ndamukong Suhs of the world and the Von Millers of the world. And that's the way he feels as a player, and I don't think that's going to change.
John's with us. John, anything else that stood out to you between Roseman and Fletcher, who both spoke today? There was a lot there, a lot in this transcript. What was the juicy parts for you?
Well, the juiciest part is, it was a celebratory thing, mainly talking about Fletcher's deal, but obviously you had some messy business to address, and that's Nelson Aguilar. And both Howie Roseman and Fletcher Cox were involved, obviously, because Howie's in charge of this, the football side of this organization, and Fletcher was at the strip club. So, but both took the tack of saying mum and being tight-lipped and basically saying no comment about the situation involving Nelson Aguilar. So, as far as the Eagles go, we're not going to get any clarification. They're going to let the legal process play out and see what happens from there. And that part didn't change from today's press conference.
All right. For more on the Eagles, check out 973ESPN.com. John has more on the NFL at todayspigskin.com. You can follow John on Twitter at JF McMullen. And, of course, right here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, John.
Hey, thanks, Mike.